Welcome. On behalf of the Lecture Committee and the Rogie Committee, I'd like to welcome Dr. Jennifer Burns to Wabash College. Dr. Burns is a noted historian from the University of Virginia, where she teaches courses on American political, cultural, and intellectual history. She completed her undergraduate work at Harvard and received her master's and PhD degrees from the University of California, Berkeley. Her new book, Goddess of the Market, Ayn Rand and the American Right, features extensive research on Rand's life, work, and influence. The title of her talk tonight is In Defense of Capitalism, The Ideas of Ayn Rand. There's going to be a reception and a book signing after the talk in Rogie Lounge. I hope you can all join us for that. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jennifer Burns. Thank you.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay? Got good auditory in the back? Okay, great. If at any point you can't hear me, just start waving and I'll try to remember to project my voice. So thank you for having me. I'm really honored to be here. I didn't know much about Wabash before I came here, or Wabash. I haven't quite figured out the emphasis on that. But I've spent time with students and faculty. I've been really impressed by your engagement with ideas and the community you've built here. So thank you for having me. Thank you to Professor Christy Byun for organizing everything and making my trip here really smooth. Now, when we first started emailing about me coming out here, Professor Byun suggested, Ayn Rand's been in the news a lot. Maybe you can come and, give us some basics about her, just sort of familiarize us with her. But I wanted to ask, how many people here have read The Fountainhead? Could I get a show of hands? Okay, pretty good. And how many have read Atlas Shrugged? Okay, about even. Interesting. So hopefully I won't bore those of you who are familiar with Rand, and I'll try to keep it basic enough so that those of you who haven't can still follow where I'm going. And before I get started, again, you may know this, but one of the questions I always get is, how do you pronounce the first name of the subject of your book? So here's the way to remember it. Her name is pronounced Ayn, and Ayn rhymes with mine, which is very fitting for a philosopher of ethical selfishness. So Ayn and mine, keep it in your head and you'll never forget it. Now, in addition to just covering some of the basics about this novelist and philosopher who's been in the news so much lately, I was asked to talk about her relationship to the history of conservatism, to the libertarian movement, and to contemporary politics. So I'm going to do all of that today, and I think that one of the most interesting things about Rand is the way that she intersects with our current political categories. She's a very provocative thinker, and I hope that my talk today can provoke you into thinking about and rethinking some of the basic political categories that we take for granted. So there's a durable stereotype about Ayn Rand, that she's a cheesy novelist beloved particularly by the pimply adolescent in the throes of an identity crisis. Now, there's a grain of truth to this, I will admit, but what I argue in my book is that instead, we should consider Ayn Rand the ultimate gateway to life on the right. Now, there are two facets of her thought that make her significant that I chose to focus on, that have made her a perennial favorite of the political right. The first is her belief in limited minimal government. The second, her defense of laissez-faire capitalism. Now, she was also an atheist, and it's her atheism that keeps me from calling her a conservative. And I chose the title of my book deliberately. I wanted to call attention to this broader ideological category, the American right, that includes conservatives but isn't limited to conservatives. So into this category, we might put people like Rand, who share certain conservative ideas but are not culturally conservative, are not religious believers. We can throw in sundry other anarcho-capitalists, classical liberals, libertarians. So I wanted to draw our attention away from simply conservatism to the broader intellectual and ideological context of which it is part. And what I do in my book is I describe Rand's life, her ideas, why people were drawn to her, what kind of impact she had. I'm the first author who was given full access to Rand's papers in the private Ayn Rand archive. And I used this material, so things like her unpublished, unedited diary entries, drafts of her novels and her political writing, secret MASH notes to her husband, things like this. I used these to sort of probe the hidden story behind Rand and to figure out what it was she offered her readers and how it was she formulated and conveyed her ideas. And what I discovered pretty quickly was that for many readers, Rand was a transformative experience. They said again and again, Rand changed my life. And they wrote her these intense letters describing what she had meant to them. I'm going to quote briefly from one, a young reader who said to Rand, quote, "About a month ago, I noticed how much I was talking about your books to my teachers and classmates. As a result of my enthusiasm, I have lost 2 friends. I'm beginning to realize how unimportant these people are." Now, readers like this might move away from Rand over time. They might decide that she didn't have all the answers they thought she did. But her ideas about capitalism, about government, about morality, these would often stay with them even as they moved on to other thinkers or other ideas. And as I show in the book, she's become part of American political culture, part of how we think about our world, government, the state, what is possible and what should be considered moral in our world. Now, before I dig into all that, let me just go back to the basics. Who is Ayn Rand? She was born in 1905 in Petrograd, Russia, as Elisa Rosenbaum. And when she was 12, her family's property was seized during the Russian Revolution. And this became a really formative event in her life. So I'd like to read here the opening paragraph of my book that describes this event. "It was a wintry day in 1918 when the Red Guard pounded on the door of Zinovy Rosenbaum's chemistry shop. The guards bore a seal of the state of Russia, which they nailed upon the door, signaling that it had been seized in the name of the people. Zinovy could at least be thankful the mad whirl of revolution had taken only his property, not his life. But his eldest daughter, Elisa, 12 at the time, burned with indignation. The shop was her father's. He had worked for it, studied long hours at university, dispensed valued advice and medicines to his customers. Now, in an instant, it was gone, taken to benefit nameless, faceless peasants, strangers who could offer her father nothing in return. The soldiers had come in boots, carrying guns, making clear that resistance would mean death. Yet they had spoken the language of fairness and equality, their goal to build a better society for all. Watching, listening, absorbing, Elisa knew one thing for certain. Those who invoked such lofty ideals were not to be trusted. Talk about helping others was only a thin cover for force and power. It was a lesson she would never forget. Now, I'll fast forward from there because it's all in the book. The way that her family lost its established position in Russian society, tumbled to a life of poverty, how they barely eked out a living, how Rand decided she had to leave Russia, got out of the country with help from relatives in America, and then went straight to Hollywood. How she worked first as a Hollywood screenwriter, then published The Fountainhead in 1943, her first major successful novel, and made her career with Atlas Shrugged. And what I do in the book is show how this original insight about the power of the state, the dangers of collectivism, was woven into all her fiction. And I also show how deliberately political her work was. Now, this is where the opportunity to go into the archive and look at her papers and see what she was thinking as she conceived her novels, this is where it really helped me understand and come to see that she saw herself as a political writer. And she came over the course of her career. She started as a Hollywood screenwriter. In 1940, growing increasingly alarmed at Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal, she volunteered for the Wendell Willkie campaign. And this was really a watershed for her. It's during this campaign that she seized on a new ambition, not just to be a novelist, but to be, as she wrote to a friend, the quote, John Steinbeck of the right. She wanted to be writing novels of capitalism, novels of individualism that would motivate her side, just as she thought socialist and communist authors were doing the same for the left. So it was no accident that these ideas went into her books. And it was no accident then that political conservatives seized upon The Fountainhead when it came out and identified her as a fresh new voice, someone important speaking for their cause. But as I said, Rand was an atheist. She was always forthright about her atheism, and this created this fundamental tension between her and conservatives. Now, I'm going to read you another brief excerpt from the book that describes the meeting between her and the most famous conservative of her day, perhaps of ours, William Buckley Jr. Now, I'm going to pick up this story in 1950. The Fountainhead was published in 1943. Now, this 7-year gap was quite significant. In 1943, the book came out. We were still in World War II. By 1950, we had emerged into a Cold War. We saw Russia as our implacable enemy. And as I described, religion had become more important. The tone of American politics had become more focused around religion in a way it hadn't been before. And so Rand's place in the conservative movement, even though only 7 years had passed, could really profoundly shift in this brief time. In the years since The Fountainhead, religion had moved to the forefront of American political discourse. In turn, Rand became an ever more devoted atheist. At a cocktail party, she met the young Buckley, already a celebrated figure on the right. She was characteristically direct, telling him in her thick Russian accent, "You are too intelligent to believe in God." Or as Buckley had it, Gott. Buckley was both amused and offended. He sought the advice of other libertarians, including Rand's good friend Isabel Patterson, as he pulled together National Review, the flagship magazine of American conservatism. But Rand became one of his favorite targets. And it's true, Buckley launched a virtual feud with Rand that would continue for many, many years. From this first moment, she made the worst possible impression on him with her opening gambit. But losing the esteem of Buckley or starting a conflict with him was not important to Rand or didn't slow her down much because she had other influential admirers, most remembered today, Alan Greenspan, the former head of the Federal Reserve. Now, Greenspan was a member of a small group of young people, students, who gathered around Rand in the 1950s in New York. They called themselves tongue-in-cheek the Collective because they were all devotees of this philosophy of individualism. And at the nucleus of the Collective were a young college couple, Barbara Brandon and Nathaniel Brandon, who Rand had befriended, and they brought their friends and acquaintances to see her, and those who really connected with her became part of this group, the Collective. And Greenspan became one of this small band, numbering from 8 to 12 people over the years. So let me begin. Although